The heavy glass doors hissed shut, but the sweat on my neck wasn't from the Missouri heat. I'd driven 18 hours straight from Denver to see my grandson, Leo, become an Eagle Scout. I was just a face in the crowd until the guest of honor, a 3-star colonel, stepped to the podium. His eyes snagged on my forearm where my sleeve had slipped, revealing a scorched unit mark that shouldn't exist on any public record. The colonel's voice died. His face turned a ghostly gray. In that pristine silence, I realized the secrets I'd buried in the desert had finally outrun my rig. My past was back, and it was looking for blood. Before we continue, let us know where you're tuning in from. Drop your city and mile marker in the comments. You're watching Highway Stories Untold, and we love seeing how far these stories travel. The hum of the air conditioning felt like a low-frequency warning as I adjusted my tie, a restrictive thing that felt like a noose compared to my usual flannel. I shifted in the velvet seat, feeling the familiar weight of my pocket knife against my thigh. The only piece of my real life I'd managed to smuggle past the formal attire requirement. I looked at Leo, standing tall near the front. He looked just like his father, my son, who didn't make it back from a dusty stretch of road outside Kandahar. That loss was why I pushed my Peterbilt through a lightning storm in the Rockies, ignoring my aching back just to be here. The colonel at the podium, a man named Sterling, was still staring. He was supposed to be giving the keynote on service and sacrifice, but he looked like he'd just seen a ghost. I pulled my jacket sleeve down, covering the mark, a jagged lightning bolt wrapped in barbed wire. It was the insignia of a black recovery unit that operated in the shadows. We were the ones they sent in when the brass messed up and things needed to disappear. Sterling cleared his throat, his fingers trembling. He looked away, but the damage was done. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. A man like that doesn't get scared of a retired sergeant unless there's a reason, and usually that reason involves a secret that's still drawing blood. I tried to focus on Leo, wanting this day to be about him, but the world has a way of leaking in. I noticed 2 men in dark suits standing by the side exits. They weren't scouts, and they weren't parents. They had that distinct, restless energy of hired muscle, their eyes scanning the rows for threats. One of them spoke into a lapel mic, his gaze settling on the back row where I sat. I checked the exits. My truck was parked 3 blocks away in a lot without height restrictions. If things went south, I needed a clear path. I watched Sterling finish his speech, a hollow, practiced set of platitudes, and as the applause broke out, he didn't wait to shake hands. He stepped off the stage and moved toward a private side room, flanked by the 2 suits. He glanced back one last time, a look of desperate calculation on his face. Leo was called up. The crowd cheered. I stood and clapped, my heart swelling with pride that nearly drowned out the alarm bells. He looked so happy. He didn't know about the things I'd done to ensure he could grow up in a world where he only had to worry about merit badges. But as the ceremony wound down, one of the suits started moving toward me. He didn't look like he wanted to talk about scouting. He moved with a heavy, aggressive gait, pushing past an elderly woman without a word of apology. That was the line. You don't come into a place of honor and act like a predator. I sat back down, my hands resting flat on my knees, waiting. "Mr. Mercer," the man said, his voice a low growl. He didn't wait for an answer. "The colonel would like a word, privately, now." "I'm watching my grandson," I said, my voice steady, the same tone I use when a dispatcher tries to force me into an illegal shift. "I'll be here until the last ribbon is handed out." The man leaned in, his shadow falling over me. I could smell the cheap peppermint he was chewing to hide the scent of tobacco. "It wasn't a request, old man. Move, or we make a scene that your kid up there is never going to forget." I looked at Leo. He was smiling, holding his plaque. I looked back at the suit. The calm I'd spent years cultivating didn't break, but it shifted into something sharper. "You shouldn't have mentioned the boy," I whispered. I stood up slowly. "I'm not as fast as I used to be, but I know where the leverage is." As I stepped into the aisle, the man tried to grab my elbow to guide me. I didn't let him. I pivoted, catching his wrist in a grip, honed by decades of cinching down load straps. I squeezed, feeling the small bones of his wrist grind together. His eyes went wide, his mouth opening to shout, but I was already moving him toward the exit, my body shielding the movement from the crowd. "We're going to talk," I said, "but not where my grandson can see your face." I forced the suit through the heavy service doors, the muffled sound of the applause for Leo fading into the sterile, echoing silence of a concrete maintenance hallway. This was the transition, the moment where the grandfather in the cheap suit had to step back so the man who earned the name Redline could take the wheel. The suit tried to buck, his free hand reaching for something beneath his jacket, likely a compact 9mm. But I didn't give him the air to breathe. I slammed him against the cinder block wall before he could clear leather, the impact sending a dull thud through the corridor that wouldn't be heard by the cheering families on the other side. I didn't use a fist. I used my forearm, the one with the scorched lightning bolt mark, pinning his throat so his heels dangled an inch off the floor. "I'm a trucker now," I said, my voice vibrating in the small space like a cold start engine in a deep freeze. "I spend my days hauling 40 tons of steel through mountain passes, where one wrong twitch of the wrist means a fireball in the canyon. Do you have any idea how much grip strength it takes to keep a rig like that on the road when the brakes smoke out and the world is trying to push you off the edge?" His face turned a shade of purple that matched the bruises I was about to give him. He wheezed, his eyes darting toward the end of the hall where the second suit was appearing. The new arrival didn't hesitate. He reached into his waistband, his face set in a mask of professional aggression. "The first rule of the road is that you never wait for the collision if you can steer into the skid." I spun my current captive around, using him as a human shield just as the second man lunged. The second suit was faster, younger, but he was reckless. He underestimated the old man in the tie. He swung a heavy, telescopic baton, aiming for my temple. I dipped my shoulder, feeling the wind of the metal rod whistle past my ear, and drove my palm into his solar plexus with the weight of 20 years on the road behind it. The air left him in a ragged gasp, and I didn't give him time to find it again. I grabbed his collar and the seat of his pants, using his own momentum to launch him into a stack of folded metal chairs. The crash was deafening, a chaotic symphony of screeching steel and tumbling aluminum that signaled the situation was now officially irreversible. I turned back to the first man who was gasping on the floor, clawing at his throat. I didn't feel anger. I felt that old, familiar coldness, the internal governor clicking off. I reached down, grabbed his tie, and hauled him toward the private office where the colonel was waiting. My boots echoed on the concrete, a rhythmic heavy sound that felt like the ticking of a clock. I didn't knock. I kicked the door frame hard enough to splinter the wood, stepping inside with the suit still clutched in my hand like a discarded tarp. Colonel Sterling was standing behind a mahogany desk, a glass of scotch in his hand that was shaking so hard the ice cubes were rattling like dice in a gambler's cup. "Jack," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the man I was holding. "You always were a blunt instrument." "And you were always a coward, Sterling," I replied, tossing the suit onto the floor at his feet. "You're a 3-star now, high enough to bury the files from Operation Blindside under a mountain of red tape, but not high enough to erase the fact that you left 12 men in that canyon to cover your own tracks while you flew out on the last bird." "That was 20 years ago," he snapped, his voice cracking as he tried to summon the ghost of his authority. "The world has moved on. I've done great things since then. I'm the guest of honor here for a reason. I'm a hero to these people." "You're the guest of honor because these people don't know who you really are," I said, stepping closer until the desk was the only thing between us, my presence filling the room the way a tractor-trailer fills a narrow alley. But I remember the screams on the comms. I remember the smell of the burning diesel. And more importantly, my dashcam in the rig outside has a hard drive full of scanned documents I recovered before the fire started. Proof that the insurgents who hit us were wearing uniforms you paid for. It was a strategic bluff. The documents were actually in a safe deposit box 3 states away, hidden under a different name. But in this game, The threat is often more effective than the strike. Sterling's face went from grey to translucent. He knew that if those recovery logs went public, his career, his pension, and his freedom would vanish faster than a vapor trail in a high wind. "What do you want, Mercer?" he hissed, his hand creeping toward the desk drawer. "Money? I can make you very comfortable. You can retire from that vibrating tin box you call a life." "I don't want your blood money," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I want you to walk back out onto that stage after the ceremony, and I want you to resign. Tell them your health is failing. Tell them whatever lie you want, but you're done wearing that uniform. You don't get to stand in front of boys like Leo and talk about honor ever again." Suddenly, the door behind me creaked. I spun, my hand going to my pocket knife, my body coiled for a third fight. But it wasn't another suit. It was Leo. He was holding his Eagle Scout plaque, his eyes wide as he looked at the ruined furniture, the groaning men on the floor, and his grandfather standing over a trembling general. "Grandpa?" he asked, his voice small, vibrating with a confusion that cut deeper than any blade. "What's happening? Why are they on the floor?" The coldness in my chest cracked. I looked at the boy, the only thing I had left of my son, and then I looked at Sterling, who saw the opening. The colonel's fear turned into a desperate, cornered malice. He didn't look at me anymore. He looked at Leo. He realized that the only way to keep his secret was. The air in the office grew heavy, thick with the smell of ozone, spilled scotch, and the metallic tang of desperation. Sterling's hand had disappeared into the desk drawer, and I knew the rhythm of that movement too well. It was the frantic, jagged grab of a man who had run out of lies and was reaching for the only thing he had left: violence. I didn't think. I moved. The distance between me and the mahogany desk was 3 paces, an eternity when a 9mm is coming into play. But I'd spent 20 years throwing heavy chains over flatbeds and wrestling gear sticks that didn't want to budge. I lunged, my body operating on an instinct that predated my trucking days. My shoulder slammed into the edge of the heavy desk with the force of a runaway rig. The wood groaned as I pinned Sterling's arm inside the drawer. A sickening crack echoed in the small room, followed by the general's high-pitched, unvarnished scream. The pistol clattered inside the drawer, but as the desk shifted from my impact, it slid across the carpet toward the center of the room. "Leo, get back!" I barked, my voice echoing with the authority of a sergeant major on a hot range. But the second suit, the one I'd launched into the chairs, was back on his feet. He was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, his eyes fixed on the weapon. He scrambled for it, his fingers inches from the grip. I couldn't let him get that gun. If he did, the story ended here, in a basement office in Missouri, and my grandson's future would be stained with the blood of a secret war he never asked to inherit. I launched myself over the desk, my boots catching Sterling's shoulder as I vaulted. I tackled the suit just as his hand closed around the pistol. We hit the floor hard, a tangled mess of limbs and suppressed rage. He was younger, stronger, and fueled by the panic of a man who knew he'd failed his boss. He drove a knee into my ribs, and for a second, the world went grey at the edges. I felt a rib pop, a familiar dull pain that reminded me of a jackknife incident in the winter of '09. To ensure I had something more important to lose than my life, Sterling reached into the desk drawer, his fingers closing around the grip of a service pistol, his eyes locking onto the boy. "Leo, get back!" I yelled, but the boy was frozen, trapped in the headlights of a situation he couldn't comprehend. But I'm a trucker. I'm used to the grind. I rolled with the impact, using my weight to pin his arm against the concrete beneath the carpet. I grabbed his thumb and twisted, a technique I'd learned in a place the map doesn't show, until the gun slipped from his nerveless fingers. I didn't stop there. I drove my elbow into his jaw once, twice, until the fight left him and he went limp. I didn't rely on luck. I relied on the kinetic energy of a man who has spent his life moving heavy things. I stood up, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my cracked ribs like a piston in a failing engine. I kicked the gun under a heavy steel filing cabinet and turned back to the room. Sterling was slumped in his chair, cradling his shattered arm, his face the color of old parchment. He looked at me, and for the first time, the mask of the hero general was gone. There was only the hollow shell of a man who had built a kingdom on the bodies of better soldiers. "Grandpa," Leo's voice was trembling. He was standing by the door, his Eagle Scout plaque clutched to his chest like a shield. You fought them. You're like the stories Dad told me." I wiped a smear of blood from my lip, trying to steady my breathing, letting the red line intensity settle back into the quiet hum of a long-haul driver. "Your dad knew the truth about service, Leo. It's not always about the medals. Sometimes it's about making sure the wrong people don't get to tell the story." I walked over to the desk and picked up the Scotch glass Sterling had dropped. I poured the remaining amber liquid over his ruined arm. He hissed in pain, but I didn't care. I leaned in close, my face inches from his, ensuring he saw the lightning bolt on my arm, the mark of the ghosts he thought he'd laid to rest. "Here's how this goes," I whispered, the coldness back in my eyes. "You're going to walk out there. You're going to tell the organizer that you've had a sudden, debilitating health crisis. You'll resign your commission by morning. And if you ever look toward my grandson again, I won't come for you with a tie on." I grabbed the lapel of his uniform, the one covered in ribbons he didn't earn. "And Sterling, my dashcam caught every second of your men attacking me in that hallway. The receipts are already uploading to a cloud server that your friends in DC can't touch." It was a strategic bluff, a final escalation to ensure the strategic situation could never be undone. As I looked at the broken man in front of me, I saw the exact moment his pride collapsed. He nodded slowly, the fight finally gone. I turned to Leo and held out my hand, softening my gaze. "Come on, kid. Let's get out of here. I've got a load of refrigerated freight that needs to be in Chicago by dawn, and I think we've both had enough of the guest of honor for one night." The walk back through the convention center felt like navigating a minefield, but the high-intensity clash in the office had cleared the path. My ribs screamed with every breath, a sharp, stabbing reminder of the suit I'd had to put down. But I kept my pace steady. Leo walked beside me, his eyes darting between my face and the blood on my knuckles. He was seeing a version of his grandfather that didn't fit the man who took him fishing or told him stories about life on the open road. He was seeing the man I'd spent 20 years trying to bury under miles of asphalt, the ghost of Jack Redline Mercer. "Grandpa," he whispered as we passed the refreshment table where oblivious parents were still laughing and sipping punch. "That man, the colonel, he was afraid of you. He wasn't afraid of me, Leo," I said, my voice low and gravelly, like tires on a dirt shoulder. "He was afraid of the truth. People like that build houses out of glass and spend their whole lives praying nobody picks up a stone." We reached the heavy glass doors of the entrance, and the humid Missouri air hit me like a physical weight. I could see the flashing lights of a squad car pulling into the far end of the lot, likely responding to the medical emergency Sterling was forced to claim. I didn't slow down. In this business, you don't wait around for the paperwork when the job is done. You move. But as we crossed the asphalt toward my rig, the sound of a high-revving engine tore through the quiet of the night. A black SUV, the twin to the one the suits had arrived in, screeched around the corner of the building, its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin sabers. It wasn't over. Sterling's backup had arrived, and they weren't interested in talking. "Leo, get behind the truck, now!" I yelled, shoving him toward the massive steel bumper of my Peterbilt. The SUV didn't stop. It accelerated, aiming straight for us. I didn't have time to climb into the cab. I grabbed a heavy load bar from the side rack of the trailer, a solid piece of steel meant for securing 40,000 pounds of freight. As the vehicle roared past, I swung with everything I had left, the steel bar shattering the passenger side window and clipping the driver's shoulder. The SUV swerved, tires screaming as it fishtailed across the lot before slamming into a row of parked cars. I didn't wait for them to recover. I scrambled into the driver's seat of the Pete and hauled Leo inside, locking the doors just as the driver of the SUV stumbled out, clutching a handgun. I didn't reach for a weapon. I reached for the ignition. The 550 horsepower Caterpillar engine roared to life, a mechanical beast waking up to defend its own. "Hold on, kid," I growled, slamming the transmission into gear. I didn't head for the exit. I headed for the SUV. I used the massive steel grille of the Peterbilt to push their vehicle sideways, pinning their doors shut against a concrete light pole. The driver scrambled back, realized he was outmatched by 18 wheels of American iron, and dropped his weapon as the sirens grew louder. I shifted into reverse, cleared the wreckage, and swung the long nose of the truck toward the highway. The dashcam was glowing steady green on the windshield, recording the entire attempted assault. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a pursuit of justice that they couldn't outrun. The highway swallowed us, the white lines flashing by like the pages of a book I was finally ready to close. My ribs throbbed in time with the engine's vibration, a dull, rhythmic reminder of the cost of the last hour. Beside me, Leo was silent, his hands still gripping the Eagle Scout plaque so tight his knuckles were white. We were miles away from the convention center before I felt the tension in my shoulders start to give way. "Are we being followed?" Leo asked, his voice barely audible over the hum of the tires. I checked the mirrors, big, polished expanses of glass that showed nothing but the empty Missouri interstate and the faint glow of the city receding behind us. "No, Leo. They're dealing with the police now, and with the footage on this dashcam, they won't be following anyone for a long time." I reached out and adjusted the camera, ensuring the save light was still on. That little box held everything: Sterling's panic, the suit's aggression, and the moment the hero general showed his true face. It was more than evidence. It was the final nail in a coffin 20 years in the making. "Grandpa," Leo said, turning to look at me, "the mark on your arm, the one the colonel saw. What does it mean?" I glanced down at the lightning bolt. The barbed wire looked darker in the dim light of the cab. "It means I was part of a group that did the jobs nobody else wanted to do. We recovered things that were lost. Sometimes people, sometimes secrets. Sterling was our commander. He made a mistake that cost a lot of lives, and he tried to bury the evidence with the men who were there to see it." "My dad, was he part of it?" "No," I said, and the truth felt like a heavy weight being lifted. "Your father was a straight-up hero, Leo. He fought in the light. He didn't have to hide who he was. That's why I did what I did tonight, so you could keep looking at that plaque and knowing the world has room for men like him." We drove through the night, the Peterbilt cutting through the dark like a ship through a black sea. I shared stories then, not the dark ones, but stories of his father as a boy, stories about the road and the simple, quiet pride of doing a job well. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that only a trucker truly understands. As we approached his town, I saw a black sedan pulled over on the shoulder. My heart spiked, the old red line instinct flared, and I shifted down, ready for another confrontation. But as we passed, I saw it was just a flat tire, a family waiting for a tow. I didn't stop, not because I didn't want to help, but because I had a more important delivery to make tonight. I pulled into the quiet suburban street where Leo lived. The houses were dark, the neighborhood sleeping in the kind of peace that men like Sterling don't understand. I brought the rig to a halt in front of his driveway, the air brakes hissing a final tired greeting. "You're a good man, Leo," I said, looking at him. "Better than I was at your age. Keep that plaque. You earned it." The rumble of the Peterbilt's engine felt like a living thing in the silence of the suburban street, a stark contrast to the quiet lives behind the darkened windows. Leo sat for a moment longer, his hand on the door handle, looking at the dashboard as if trying to memorize the layout of the world I lived in. He looked at the dashcam, then at the lightning bolt on my arm, and finally back at me. "Will you come back for the dinner tomorrow?" he asked, his voice returning to that of a 14-year-old boy. "I can't, kid," I said, and the regret was a dull ache behind my ribs. "I've got a load of refrigerated freight that needs to be in Chicago by sunrise. The road doesn't stop for celebrations." He nodded, understanding the gravity of the work in a way he hadn't 2 hours ago. He climbed down from the cab, his boots hitting the pavement with a solid, confident sound. He didn't look back with fear anymore. He looked back with a kind of respect that men usually have to bleed for. He waved once, a sharp salute he'd picked up from his father's old unit photos, and then he disappeared into the house. I sat there for a moment, the engine idling, the interior of the cab feeling suddenly very large and very quiet. The dashboard lights flickered, reflecting off the glass of the dashcam. I reached up and ejected the memory card, tucking it into the hidden pocket of my vest. By tomorrow morning, a copy of that footage would be in the hands of a journalist I trusted, and another would be on its way to the Department of Justice. Sterling's health crisis was about to become very public and very permanent. I put the truck in gear and slowly pulled away, the long trailer tailing behind me like a shadow. I had a job to do, and the road didn't care about my broken ribs or my haunted past. The interstate was empty now, a ribbon of silver under the moonlight. As I shifted through the gears, the pain in my side settled into a dull ache, a reminder that I was still standing, still moving, still the one at the wheel. I thought about the colonel's face when he saw the mark on my arm. He thought he could outrun the things he'd done, but the road is long, and eventually everything catches up. I wasn't just Jack Mercer anymore. For one night I'd been Redline again, the man who recovered the lost. But as the miles piled up and the sun began to hint at the horizon, I felt that part of me retreating back into the shadows. I reached over and turned on the CB radio, the static a comforting hum in the dark. "Eastbound on I-70, any reports on the scales?" A voice crackled through the speakers. I picked up the mic, my voice steady and calm. "Clear sailing all the way to the state line, driver. Keep the shiny side up." I hung up the mic and looked out at the road ahead. The dawn was coming, and with it, a new day where the lions were in cages and the boys were safe in their beds. I pressed the accelerator, the Peterbilt responding with a roar of approval, and I drove into the morning, alone but never lonely. I watched the suburban street disappear in my side mirrors, the red glow of my taillights fading against the neatly trimmed lawns. My chest felt tight, not just from the cracked ribs, but from the weight of the silence that usually follows a storm. I'd come here to be a grandfather, to sit in the back row and clap for a boy who represents everything good left in my bloodline. Instead, I'd had to dig up a ghost I'd spent 20 years trying to starve. The interstate opened up before me, a black ribbon of possibility cutting through the Missouri night. I reached out and touched the dashcam, the little green light blinking like a steady pulse. It was the only witness left to the truth, a silent record of a hero who had built his pedestal on a foundation of betrayal. Sterling would wake up in a hospital bed tomorrow thinking he'd escaped with his life, but by the time the sun hit the horizon, the world would know exactly what he was. I thought about Leo's face, the way it changed when he saw me standing over those men. I'd wanted him to see a man of peace, but maybe it was better this way. Maybe he needed to know that being kind doesn't mean being weak, and that sometimes the most important thing a man can do is stand in the gap when the darkness tries to push through. The Peterbilt hummed beneath me, its steady vibration a familiar comfort that settled the tremors in my hands. I was just a ghost on the highway again, a shadow passing between cities, carrying the things people need but never think about. I'm still broken, still carrying the weight of men I couldn't save. But tonight, I'd saved the one who mattered most. I leaned back into the seat, adjusted my mirrors, and watched the stars. The road was long, but for the first time in a long time, the destination didn't matter as much as the drive. Thank you for watching. And if stories like this one about courage, sacrifice, and second chances speak to you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more incredible true stories that honor the forgotten heroes among us.